Let's step back to 1942 and visit the topic of Executive Order 9066, resulting in the Japanese-American incarceration. The source of this information is the National Archives at archives.gov, at least for now. So, Executive Order 9066, resulting in Japanese-American incarceration in 1942. It was issued by Franklin Roosevelt on February 19, 1942. This order authorized the forced removal of all persons deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast to, quote, relocation centers further inland, resulting in the incarceration of Japanese Americans. Between 1861 and 1940, approximately 275,000 Japanese immigrated to Hawaii and the mainland United States, the majority arriving between 1898 and 1924, when quotas were adopted that ended Asian immigration. Many worked in Hawaiian sugarcane fields as contract laborers. After their contracts expired, a small number remained and opened up shops. Other Japanese immigrants settled on the west coast of the mainland United States, cultivating marginal farmlands and fruit orchards, fishing, and operating small businesses. Their efforts yielded impressive results. Japanese Americans controlled less than 4% of California's farmland in 1940, but they produced more than 10% of the total value of the state's farm resources. As was the case with other immigrant groups, Japanese Americans settled in ethnic neighborhoods and established schools, houses of worship, and economic and cultural institutions. Ethnic concentration was further increased by real estate agents who would not sell properties to Japanese Americans outside of existing Japanese American enclaves, and by a 1913 act passed by the California Assembly restricting land ownership to those eligible to be citizens. In 1922, the U.S. Supreme Court in Aizawa versus the United States upheld the government's right to deny U.S. citizenship to Japanese immigrants. On December 7, 1941, the Emperor of Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Hawaii. The attack launched a rash of fear about national security, especially on the West Coast. This, combined with economic competition, distrust over cultural separateness, and long-standing anti-Asian racism, turned into a disaster for Japanese Americans. Lobbyists from Western states, many representing competing economic interests or nativist groups, pressured Congress and the president to remove persons of Japanese descent from the West Coast, both foreign-born, and then it has parentheses, says Issei, meaning first generation of Japanese in the U.S., and American citizens, Nisei, Nisei, the second generation of Japanese in America, U.S. citizens by birthright. During congressional committee hearings, Department of Justice representatives raised constitutional and ethical objections to the proposal, so the U.S. Army carried out the task instead. The West Coast was divided into military zones, and on February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066 that authorized military commanders to exclude civilians from military areas. Although the language of the order did not specify any ethnic group, Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt of the Western Defense Command proceeded to announce curfews that included only Japanese Americans. General DeWitt first encouraged the voluntary evacuation by Japanese Americans from a limited number of areas. About 7% of total Japanese American population in these areas complied. Then, on March 29, 1942, under the authority of Roosevelt's executive order, DeWitt issued Public Proclamation No. 4, which began the forced evacuation and detention of Japanese Americans, West Coast residents, on a 48-hour notice. Only a few days prior to the proclamation, on March 21st, Congress had passed Public Law 503, which made violation of Executive Order 9066 a misdemeanor punishable by up to 1 year in prison and a $5,000 fine. In the next 6 months, approximately 122,000 men, women, and children were forcibly moved to, quote, assembly centers. They were then evacuated to and confined in isolated, fenced, and guarded relocation centers, also known as internment camps. The 10 sites were in remote areas, 6 western states, and Arkansas. Heart Mountain in Wyoming, Tule Lake and Manzanar in California, Topaz in Utah, Poston and Gila River in Arizona, Granada in Colorado, Minidoka in Idaho, and Jerome and Rower in Arkansas. Nearly 70,000 of the evacuees were American citizens. The government had made no charges against them, nor could they appeal their incarceration. All lost personal liberties, most lost homes and property as well. Although several Japanese Americans challenged the government's actions in court cases, the Supreme Court upheld their legality. Nice were nevertheless encouraged to serve in the armed forces, and some were also drafted. Those were the second-generation birthright Japanese citizens, rounded up and then asked to serve in the military. Altogether, more than 30,000 Japanese Americans served with distinction during World War II in a segregated unit. For many years after the war, various individuals and groups sought compensation for those incarcerated. The speed of evacuation forced many homeowners and businessmen to sell out quickly. Total property loss is estimated at $1.3 billion, and net income loss at $2.7 billion, calculated in 1983 dollars based on Congressional Commission investigation. The Japanese American Evacuation Claims Act of 1948, with amendments in 1951 and 1965, provided token payments for some property losses. More serious efforts to make amends took place in the early 1980s when congressionally established Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of the Civilians held investigations and made recommendations. As a result, several bills were introduced in Congress from 1984 until 1988. In 1988, Public Law 100-383 acknowledged the injustice of the incarceration, apologized for it, and provided partial restitution. A $20,000 cash payment to each person was given to the people that were incarcerated. Very trivial. So now I would like to actually read for you the transcript of Executive Order 9066. The President, Executive Order authorizing the Secretary of War to prescribe military areas. Whereas the successful prosecution of war requires every possible protection against espionage and against sabotage to national defense material, national defense premises, and national defense utilities, as defined in Section 4, Act of April 20th, 1918, 40, Stat 533, as amended by the Act of November 30th, 1940, Section 54, I don't know what stat means, 1220, it's STAT, period, maybe statement, and the Act of August 21st, 1941, 55, Stat 655, USC Title 50, Section 104, blah, blah, blah. Now, therefore, by the virtue of the authority vested in me as President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I hereby authorize and direct the Secretary of War, the military commanders whom he may from time to time designate, whenever he or any designated commander deems such action is necessary or desirable, to prescribe military areas in such places and of such extent as he or the appropriate military commander may determine, from which any or all persons may be excluded, and with respect to which the right of any person to enter, remain in, or leave shall be subject to whatever restrictions the Secretary of War or the appropriate military commander may impose in his discretion. The Secretary of War is hereby authorized to provide the residents of any such area who are excluded therefrom such transportation, food, shelter, and other accommodations as may be necessary in the judgment of the Secretary of War or the said military commander, and until other arrangements are made to accomplish the purpose of this order. The designation of military areas in any region or locality shall supersede designations of prohibited and restricted areas by the Attorney General under the proclamations of December 7th and 8th, 1941, and shall supersede the responsibility and authority of the Attorney General under said proclamations in respect to such prohibited and restricted areas. I hereby further authorize and direct the Secretary of War and the said military commanders to take such steps as he or the appropriate military commander may deem advisable to enforce compliance with the restrictions applicable to each military area herein above authorized to be designated, including the use of federal troops and other federal agencies with authority to accept assistance of state and local agencies. I hereby further authorize and direct all executive departments, independent establishments, and other federal agencies to assist the Secretary of War or the said military commanders in carrying out this executive order, including the furnishing of medical aid, hospitalization, food, clothing, transportation, use of land, shelter, and other supplies, equipment, utilities, facilities, and services. This order shall not be construed as modified or limiting in any way the authority heretofore granted under Executive Order Number 8972, dated December 12, 1941, nor shall it be construed as limiting or modifying the duty and responsibility of the Federal Bureau of Investigation with respect to the investigation of alleged acts of sabotage, or the duty and responsibility of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice under the proclamations of December 7th and 8th, 1941, prescribing regulations for the conduct and control of alien enemies, except as such duty and responsibility is superseded by the designation of military areas hereunder. Signed, Franklin D. Roosevelt, The White House, February 19th, 1942. And there you have it. Alien enemies. Rounded up in our country in 1942.
Thank you for listening to Everything with Everett. Connect with Everett and other listeners on Facebook and Twitter at Everett Podcast. Everett would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts by emailing mystory@everettpodcast.com. You can also leave a voicemail or send a text message to 208-391-2808. Choose to listen, speak with kindness, and have a great day.